on the line with us from France is Cole Stangler, one of the finest freelance journalists and investigative reporters working in the United States, although he's working in France right now, focusing on labor and politics. Cole Stangler, ColeStangler.com is his website, and you can tweet him at Cole Stangler. Cole, welcome back to the program. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Thanks so much for having me.
So you are in France to check out what's going on with Marine Le Pen and the whole EU and the French elections and all this kind of stuff, right?
Correct, yeah. Been doing some pieces from France looking at this really interesting, frankly frightening political situation that's taking place here.
So what have you learned?
Well, so I have a piece that just came out in World Policy Journal, and this is a quarterly publication, and this season's issue is the spring 2017 issue that looks at fascism rising is the name of this issue. And so my contribution from France here was looking at the rise of the National Front. So the job here was to kind of look at where the support is coming from.
Now the National Front is Marine Le Pen's party, the to the right of the Republican Party in the United States, arguably, although certainly not to the right of the Republican Party in Mississippi.
Well, you know, I mean, this is a whole other conversation, but there have actually been some ties between some of the National Front figures visiting the U.S. and actually spending some time with congressmen a few years ago. They tried to arrange some meetings, and actually recently, some FN reps, National Front reps, met with Steve King of Iowa, who I'm sure your listeners are aware of.
Wow. And then you've got Nigel Farage hanging out with Donald Trump. I mean, we've got hardcore right-wingers from Europe trying to influence American public policy. Anyhow, back to you.
Yeah, and you know, in the National Front, I mean, it's an interesting conversation, but these, you know, this crew around Marine Le Pen, they really were inspired by Donald Trump. You know, they were tweeting after the election, and actually, they had another delegation that was in D.C. in town for CPAC actually, just several weeks ago. So they really do look up to the Republican Party, at least Donald Trump. But anyhow, so the story here is looking at kind of the National Front's rise in popularity, Marine Le Pen's rise in popularity, because they were a fringe party not too long ago. They did make it to the second round of the 2002 elections, famously in the presidential election, and they lost that second round to the incumbent, Jacques Chirac. But basically, you know, they've been a fringe party, and you know, recently they've been gaining momentum. So the piece is looking at where is this coming from, and really what to do about it. Then as a second question. And so there's, you know, I would say kind of two big pieces to the article I did. And I think it's really impossible to talk about the rise of the National Front without talking about just the disaffection of the working class from the left, and the disaffection of the working class in general from France, and in France from politics. The National Front is thriving off of people abandoning traditional parties of the left. And maybe we can get into why that's happening, but they're thriving off of people abandoning these parties, and they're thriving off of people staying home and not voting. So this is really.
Are they engaged in voter suppression tactics like the Republicans are here? Is there a way to do that in France?
That hasn't been an issue in France. I mean, the way that the French electoral system, unlike the U.S., is very heavily. It's all run by the state, by the national government. So you don't have the situation where you have states that are passing, or regions passing laws on their own. So But I do think there are some parallels to be drawn with the United States. You know, I was in parts of northern France, these communities that used to be very left-leaning. You know, these were communities that were voting for the Communist Party, that were voting for the Socialist Party, that voted for Hollande in 2012 in the most recent presidential election. And these are the same communities that are now supporting the National Front, whether it's the regional elections or the European elections, or you know, what people are anticipating to be this year's presidential election in April. And you know, you do see these are communities that used to have, if not amazing jobs, decent paying jobs, and the jobs have left. These are kind of former industrial towns in northern France, not unlike the U.S. Rust Belt place. And you know, the U.S. Rust Belt, these are parts of the country that were voting Democrat solidly, and you know, now are parts of the, you know, voting for Donald Trump. And I think it's a similar dynamic here in that I'm not willing to accept the argument that everyone who supported Donald Trump is a racist, and everyone that went and voted for Marine Le Pen or wants to vote for Marine Le Pen is a racist.
No, that's just the bit of their base that helps push them over the top when it happens. But Cole, I'm curious if for West Virginia, for example, here in the United States, Bernie carried West Virginia by like 20 points, and then Trump carried West Virginia by almost 30 points.
Yeah.
What is common between Bernie and Trump is that both of them repudiate and reject neoliberalism, the globalism, the idea of so-called free trade. In Europe, it would be the Schengen, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it, agreement. The open borders and that kind of thing. Could it be that what we're looking at is not so much the rise of the right, that they're really just opportunists, as it is the death of the neoliberal order that emerged in arguably the 80s?
Well, I don't know if I agree with you that Trump is not a neoliberal. He certainly didn't campaign as one, and I think now his moves have proven he's much closer to that ideology. But it's interesting. It's an interesting point because the National Front has kind of gotten this wave of success and this wave of popularity at the very moment where it has stopped playing up its really classic kind of xenophobic, racist, anti-Semitic base, and started to talk more about this rigged, economy, talking about politicians' lack of concern for French workers, for the fates of these communities, and really trying to play up this economic populist message, which is completely opportunistic and wrong. But I think you have to really consider the fact that that's what's helping drive their recent success. And so I think the response to that, and I try to argue for this in the piece, is you have to have a left opposition that isn't being apologetic, that isn't playing defense, that is actually trying to engage with people suffering and engaging with, delivering results to the vast majority of the population, people who are wage earners, not people who are, cultural elites necessarily, not people who are business elites, but really trying to respond to people's most material needs. And that's something that the French left, unfortunately, and the Hollande term is kind of the most clear manifestation of that, has really stopped doing. They've, it's not quite in the same level as what happened in the UK or the US, but the French left, traditional left, the Socialist Party, has been increasingly embracing this neoliberal consensus, and as a result, these voters that they used to rely on, that the French left used to rely on, aren't supporting them anymore.
So there's no French version of Bernie.
Well, it depends. It depends on who you ask, but right now, so the elections are the first round is in April, and then if no one gets a majority or no one gets above 50%, which is not expected to happen, there'll be a second round in May. And right now, there's two candidates on the left. One of them, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, is kind of a more independent-minded candidate who used to be in the Socialists. He splintered from the Socialists and is trying to launch this very populist campaign. He actually had advisors embedded with Sanders, or he sent some of his staffers to kind of look at what was happening to observe what was happening. And funnily enough, the other left-wing candidate in France right now, Benoît Hamon, who's running with the Socialists, also he went to Washington and met with Senator Sanders. This was before he won the Socialist primary. But the point is, I think people are really looking at Bernie Sanders as a success story here about how to respond to a situation where you have a weakened traditional left, and how do you kind of just get people mobilized and respond to people in a really populist and progressive fashion.
Yeah. Bernie's the most popular politician in America, 61% approval rating. Nobody's even close.
I mean, and I'll tell you what, also here, talking to people is everyone likes Bernie Sanders here. Maybe that's not terribly surprising, but people, and I mean, French people look up to Sanders, and I was meeting with, when I was in the town where I reported from for this piece in World Policy Journal in Ternier, I met with the adjunct mayor there, who's actually an old school communist. He's from the Communist Party. So this is a town that has a local communist mayor that's voting for the National Front, which I think is indicative of this political moment. But anyhow, he's talking about Bernie Sanders as an example, asking me about Bernie Sanders, and I think that's the kind of, broadly speaking, that kind of left populist response is exactly what the moment calls out for. Because I think I think the really frightening reality is I don't know how long this, as you put it, this neoliberal opposition to the far right can continue. Le Pen might not win the election this year. Emmanuel Macron, the former economic minister under Hollande, who's running not with the socialists but as an independent, is kind of the heavy favorite right now. So even if, I think Macron may well win the election, Le Pen might not win now, but I don't know how sustainable this sort of kind of politics is. This very, kind of triangulating, Clintonian, very business friendly, not populist politics can really last. And that's kind of one of the arguments that the thrust of my piece here is the best way to take on this far right populism is really through a strong left, a populist left. And
right. It basically, it doesn't always boil down to just going back to the core principles of FDR's New Deal, or going back to the core principles that you see in democratic socialism as enacted in all the Scandinavian countries?
Yeah, I think it's about just having a really a robust populist platform. So some of the things I talk about in my piece, which are being proposed right now in France slowly, people are talking about a universal basic income, just having one of the socialist candidate right now, Benoit Hamon, supports that. $750, $800 a month going out to people, providing them with just a basic source of income. People are talking about shortening the work week as well to deal with unemployment.
Right. Which France did back in the 90s, didn't they?
They did.
Back to a 35-hour week.
Well, that's the figure that often gets cited. That's officially the case, but companies do sign agreements that actually push it up beyond 35 hours. But yeah, the point is these really core economic principles are worth embracing.
This is where the victory is. Cole Stangler, his new piece is in the World Policy Journal. It's titled "The Left Restored is Mightier Than Le Pen." Cole, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back.